Webinars are recorded and posted at a later date, so please keep an eye on our channels. So Twitter at Youth Soccer Coaches and Facebook at Youth Soccer Coaches. Next week, just before we jump into Marcus's presentation, we're delighted to have a discussion with Drew Spence on the women's game. Drew has played for Chelsea Women's for 10 years, winning many titles, including the Women's Super League this season and a Champions League finalist on Sunday. So we talked to her on Monday, the same time as now, hopefully with her Champions League medal, we hope. So for today, we've got Marcus DiBernardo. He's a featured global soccer educator, having worked with Major League Soccer and European professional soccer clubs. He has written and sold over 60,000 books on soccer coaching, 3-time National College Coach of the Year, winning multiple national championships on both the women's and the men's side. So for further ado, I will let Marcus take the reins of his presentation.
Everybody, thanks, Craig, for having me, and thanks for showing up for this. So I'm going to take the next 45 minutes to talk about developing soccer intelligence and just developing player development in general. So let me get this working here. Hopefully this works. There we go. All right, so we're going to start off with an example of how do we develop soccer intelligence. So for you guys in the UK, you might have heard of the Proving Grounds. And this is an area somewhere in London, South London, where currently 14% of the English-born players have come up through this place called the Proving Grounds. And what that is, it's courts. I mean, we're not going to call them futsal courts, but they are courts where you play small-sided games, right? And it's open at night. You have access to the courts. And this is something where there's no coaching involved, right? So that gives us one indication of player development. And I'm going to keep on that theme because there's literally hundreds of examples that I can give where top players are being developed in these type of atmospheres. So when we talk about these type of atmospheres, we really want to talk about total immersion. And when we talk about total immersion, I'll give you an example of my players in Brazil. So I have a lot of players from Red Bull Brazil. And I asked them, I said, well, talk to me about, how you grew up and how you got introduced to the game. And what they would say is, Coach, listen, we at 5 and 6 years old, we would go out on the street with our friends. Our parents knew where we were. We were part of the neighborhood, and they knew we'd be safe. And we played for 6 hours a day, every single day. And when they went home, I'm sure it was on TV, their uncles, their aunts, their parents wore the game jerseys. Soccer was around them 24/7. And that kind of immersion, I'm sure people heard of the Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule. In order to become an expert, you have to do 10,000 hours, whatever. For me, there's some relevance to it. You could poke holes in that theory, but here's the reality. At 14 years old in Brazil, the kids go to professional club tryouts. At that point, they've already had 14,000 hours of street soccer. That is a lot of hours. And in the US, if you think that you could drop your kid off for soccer practice for 2 90-minute practices a week, it doesn't come close. No coach, my old coach would just say, Jesus in a sweatsuit couldn't, do miracles like this. You really have to look at some of those settings. Let's go down a little. So then we also have to look at, cultural influences too. In Brazil, the influence of the music, the influence of the dancing, the rhythm, the attitude, the passion, like all these things sort of influence the way players from different countries are brought up. And those are major influences that we can all see. I'm going to give you another example of Reading, England. And they've produced some of the top table tennis players. I don't know if anybody ever read the book, The Talent Code or Bounce, but a little formula with them was a top table tennis coach moved into the neighborhood. He built a table tennis garage in his backyard. He gave everybody a key for 24/7 access. he was there to coach, and the best players came. So it was best against best. A top-level coach was there to interject when needed, and it was 24/7 access. It's just another example of what is really at the root of player development. One of the stories that I like a lot is the Met Ozil story, where he would say, how did he get so good at these penetrating through balls and his vision and his passing range? He said he grew up playing 4 hours a day after school in a cage where the ball couldn't go out of bounds on a concrete surface with his older brothers and his older brother's friends. So physically, these players were much stronger and faster than them because they had a couple years of age on him. So he said the only way he could compete was to think one step ahead. So another thing that leads us towards player development. Now, diversity in environments. This is a huge, huge factor. So beach soccer, right? Ronaldinho, when he went to Barcelona, he would say, the touches that I take on the grass, people aren't able to understand that I learned those unique touches from playing on the beach. The environment was a really big co-producer of his skill set. You heard Neymar credit his futsal. Neymar played futsal, and this is very typical in Brazil. I had a Brazilian player who came to me who never played organized 11-a-side soccer until he was 14. Only beach soccer and futsal. His skill set was amazing. It was special. It was unique. When teams tried to press him and he played as a right back, they couldn't press him. He dribbled by everybody. I also had the starting left back for the Brazilian women's team. I had a chance to work with her for a year, and she was a strict futsal player when she came to me. And this was years before she made the Brazilian national team. And what a skill set that she had from that futsal. The other things that I would say is the environment. It is this thing where if all you ever did was play on turf, you wouldn't be able to explore the touches on the ball, the unique body positions you'd have to take up compared to if you were playing on like a really bumpy, muddy, or crappy grass field. Every player from Ghana that I've ever coached has amazing ability with ball control. And all that, in my opinion, because I've seen the videos, I've watched kids play in Ghana for a long time, and that skill set is directly from the environment. So when you see like a supplemental trainer, and I love supplemental training outside of regular training, you can't replicate those special environments though. It's still worthwhile, but you can't replicate those environments. So here's Pirlo talking about the power of perception. And he's basically saying that most players look downfield to play to a forward or to a winger, but he thinks there's a secret to the game. And his perception is he looks for the open spaces to play the ball into. He doesn't look at the players. And this whole thing about perception is a mass. We're going to talk a lot about perception, because for me, perception can be affected by a number of different ways. And our goal in training is to change players' perception. And we can do that in a number of ways. And I'm going to talk about that a little later on. But I just want you to know that perception, this is a big thing that Pirlo was speaking about. When we're making our games, game representative, when I say need for game-based training, I really mean game representative training sessions. So it needs to look like the real game. Now, if I say like a Rondo, right? And you're going to say, oh, Rondo's not game representative. For me, small-sided, Rondo to goal, not to goal, I don't care. That's game representative. You're keeping the ball with teammates as a defender or number of defenders are trying to take the ball from you. That, to me, is game representative. However, there needs to be variability in these games. You can't come out and say, hey, you know, let's do 4v2 Rondo every single day. Maybe it's never go to goal. Maybe it's never transition. You can't do the same thing every day, because the perception, you're not going to change that perception. The environment needs to change to build soccer intelligence. So that is what I would say. Game based, it has to be game representative, and it has to have variability. So just in general, and this goes, I know that I'm giving this talk on, a lot of this talk doesn't even need to be for age groups, right? I'm talking about player development overall. And I personally coach 4-year-olds through men. And a lot of these things are universal. So when I'm speaking about this, it's really universal. Decision making. So when we are playing game-based, game representative trainings, why do we do that? So players can make maximum amounts of meaningful decisions on the ball. And when you have a training session, I like to say ball rolling time of 85%. I want those kids playing 85% of the time. And then that other 15%, maybe you're talking to them a little, maybe they're resting, whatever it is. But I want them to be making meaningful decisions on the ball in game representative trainings. That's a huge building block of all my training sessions. So this I found is very interesting, is the Belgium, right? They start in the Belgian Federation starts with 1v1 at U4 and U5. It's hard for a kid at 4 years old to understand what a teammate is and how to use that teammate. It's really about the relationship between that kid and the ball. So at U6, I mean, I go up to 3v3 at U6, but they do 2v2. I think it's great. I actually do 1v1, 2v2, and 3v3 at U6, and we spend time at each part. And what I would say is this: you are building soccer intelligence by creating different environments. If all the kid did was show up at that field and play 3v3 every day, okay, it's still good because it's game representative. I would like to see variability, but they are making decisions on the ball. However, if they get to training and they play 1v1, 2v2, and 3v3, now they have to figure out solutions in all these different environments, and it brings about a flexible player who has solutions for multiple environments. So that is the Belgium. Obviously, everyone's probably seen the Manchester United study. I mean, the stats are staggering, right? 4v4 compared to 8v8. My own son is going to stay in 4v4 until after he passes 8 years old. But you could see everything is increased just by playing 4v4 compared to 8v8. And that's building the soccer brain. Now, obviously, people don't look at 11-a-side as the game within the game, but I thought this is just an interesting example. So you could see, you know, in the middle, we have 3v3, but then there's 2v1, 1v1's outside. It's the way that we should start to think about the game, because those are the skill sets the players are going to need. Obviously, Xavi, obviously one of the best of all times. Here's what I would say about Xavi, which I love. It's not down to the weight room, right? It's not about his shoulders and his biceps and how much he can bench press. That is not it at all. And the physical, we can forget about the physical. The physical has been pursued as far as we're going to pursue it. It's all about thinking quickly and having the technique to carry out on those quick decisions. Cruyff, this was an interesting quote for me because we're talking about Cruyff, who brings up a good point that even though you're on the game, you know, you're only on the ball for 3 minutes a game out of a 90-minute game, even what you do off the ball is a decision. And even to stay where you are and not move at all is still a decision. This is still all part of soccer intelligence. So we need to start to look at what we're building towards in the future. So we want to develop players that have more solutions available to them at faster speeds. They have to be able to carry out those solutions quickly with top level technique. Now, everything's about pressing nowadays, press into small spaces. So that's why you need to come up with solutions really, really quickly. Where I coach, it is really American college soccer is about athletically dominant players. And for players to have the technique and the intelligence to overcome athletically dominant players is difficult. And even in the MLS, right? Until it's funny in the MLS, once the teams spend 20+ million on payroll, now they start to have the quality to break down the athletic teams who only spend 3 to 5 million on payroll. This comes straight down to a payroll equation. The top players, you have to pay more money for them, but they can break down the physically dominant teams. We could talk about the increased attention span, emotional control, maybe minus Zidane for headbutting the guy in the World Cup, right? One of the best players on earth without emotional control in that moment. Problem solving ability, all these things. I'm not going to harp on that too much about problem solving ability. This all kind of goes into a bigger realm here. So I'm sure you've all seen this where, hey, we're going to work, and everyone uses the term cognitive, right? And for me, cognitive is just a term about processing of information. I'm good to throw the term out the window, to be fair. We have player, holding up cue cards or different colored cones, scans over his shoulder, reads the color cone that's in the air, receives the ball and passes. For me, it has very little value. With kids, okay, half turn, receive to the back foot, scan over your shoulder, say blue, and then pass the ball. If you can scan while the ball's in flight, before and after, even better. But there's no game cues. This is not game representative. If you do this exercise one time, you never have to do this exercise again because the value starts to go way downhill, in my opinion. So we talked about representative learning, learning design. And what the basic idea is here, are we changing real game behaviors? If your training session looks like a runway from an airport with cones all over the place where it looks amazing, it's great, but are you actually instilling meaningful change in behavior in the game? And those are the hard questions that you have to ask yourself. Ball mastery, skill acquisition. So this is, especially at the youth level, like this is a really big question about, I grew up in the late 80s, right? And they had the Will Corver method, amazing. I love the Will Corver method. I love Will Corver. He did an unbelievable job. And the Dutch are so technical and they make everything look so smooth. But the reality is, rote learning is when you do the same thing over and over again. And the Corver method had a lot of rote learning. And in my mind, I am not subscribing too much to a rote learning method. I think if you have a kid who's brand new to soccer and they've never done a push pass before, show them how to do the push pass. Give them the technique, let them do it, let them try it. And then for the whole rest of his career, it's about applying that push pass in game representative trainings, adapting that technique, knowing the when to do it, when to use that, and again, how to adapt it. And that's a lifetime of learning right there. So I also really think that if you go to a youth practice, that technique is not something to continue to do, because they can do that on their own. The time for meaningful decisions on the ball, we'll go back to how many meaningful decisions did each player on your team make in your training session that might only be twice a week? Because if you didn't let them make a ton of meaningful decisions on the ball, they're not going to make any decisions unless they're playing street soccer, and a lot of the kids are not playing street soccer. So your time in training, in my opinion, should be used on making those meaningful decisions. not dribbling the ball back and forth between cones. They can do that on their own. Now, here's what I'll say is with rote learning, if a kid doesn't know the technique of a push pass, doesn't know the technique of for some direction change, yeah, you should show them it. And then after you show them it, after they do it, now it's on them and they can explore different ways, because there's not one way to perform a technique. Now that's their opportunity to explore. I could go off on more of these topics because these are conversations in themselves. But all right, this is a little bit more on the repetition, right? So if you play on the beach here, no repetition is the same. There's variability in every single thing that you do on this beach. And in return, this is what develops a unique skill set. And like what I was saying about the push passes, no two people are going to hit a volley the same way, a push pass the same way. They're not going to dribble the same way. This is why it is important to, as examples, you say, this is how I do this. This is how I do, say, a right-footed volley. It's important for me to get my knee above the ball. Maybe that's one of the things that you're going to emphasize, right? But then you could let them explore their own bodies and their own movements while doing that technique. It's not, hey, this is exactly how you have to do this and you can't stray from it. So now the environment and how they perceive the environment. So let me just take you on this, because this is a mountain climber, and the mountain climber has certain abilities, and how they view their climbing strategy is based upon their own abilities. So if a guy knows he can do a certain grip with one hand, he's going to be perceiving and looking at that mountain for what his skill set is. And we'll call that affordances. So in the game, let me just, I'm going to go onto that a little more. So if you have a kid who could do a bicycle kick, when the ball is crossed, the kid's going to be like, oh yeah, this is good. I could pull a bicycle kick. So he's perceiving the cross to do a bicycle kick. If a kid can't do the bicycle kick, he's perceiving that cross in a different way because he knows he can't pull the bicycle kick. So what's he going to next? Maybe a head ball. What if he can't head the ball? What's he going to next? And this is why I'm saying that you perceive based upon your abilities. This is why playing in so many diverse settings, not just settings that the coach can make. We come in and do 350 different Rondo activities. We do every day. We're using variability. But are you playing futsal? Are you playing beach soccer? Are you playing cage soccer? If you are doing all those things, now you have all these unique skill sets. Now you perceive the game differently than somebody else. You perceive the game going back to more solutions under pressure, and you can execute at faster speeds, and you have more solutions. That is the player of the future. So how do we get players to perceive differently and to create these new skill sets? The answer for me is constraint-based training. And I have a couple quotes about all these things, you know, and it's the same. If you go from art to sports to math, you're going to get the same. And when I say the same, they say, if you allow full freedom, you think that would spur like this incredible creativity, but it's the opposite. If you allow absolute freedom, it actually hampers creativity. So in a sense, environmental constraints is the futsal field. It's the grass bumpy field. It is the beach. These are taking away things while allowing you to explore other areas. And that's what creates unique skill sets and creativity. So when we look at constraints, like one of the things is how many times in an individual constraint, you get like the real wicked fast kid and he runs by everybody in youth soccer, and that is his or her, that's their thing. They just run. But do they develop these other skill sets? No. So you have to take that and somehow, constrain that, to take away, whether you make them play in smaller areas and so forth, so they develop that skill set and don't just use that speed. Environmental is exactly what we talked about. And the task constraints are things, environmental is like the futsal, the beach, all that kind of stuff. The task constraints, 1 touch, 2 touch, any types of, the size of your pitch, the numbers of the players, the plus players, all those kind of things are task constraints that the coach has control over. Let me do this. So I get inspiration from all over the place, and this is just, these are constraints here, but this is what we call an unstable training environment. I was speaking to one of the top Aikido guys in New York City, and I went from a Shaolin monk to the Aikido guys to you name it, all over the place. And I wanted to know what makes high performance. What are the keys? And he said, well, in Aikido, we just do the same thing every practice. And I said, well, how is that going to lead to high performance? He said, every 10 minutes, we switch partners. So your partner could be 6'5", you're trying to throw him to the ground. And then a couple minutes later, your partner is 5'2" with a completely different skill set. Therefore, unstable training environment. So if we have variability, we increase the number of solutions that the players eventually are able to have. So let me give you an idea of constraint-based trainings here. I think I'm doing pretty good for time too. So constraint-based trainings. So say we have a 3-on-3, and this is an example. This might be a U6, U7 age group, whatever it is. Goal here. The only thing that will allow is the gray team could have 2 players behind the center line, while red team can only have 1. So if he was to drop this player here, obviously it'd be a 2v1 advantage. If he comes out here and he plays him the ball, this player will step up as this player steps back. They're figuring out unit defending, almost a line of restraint, right? A line of confrontation, without you having to say a word. They'll start to figure it out, because this here is the deciding factor. Now you can make this 4v4 if you wanted to. Again, only allow 1 player over, as this player, this has 2. This is a very basic constraint that you can use. This is a little bit more advanced here. You're going to look at, this would be from the 7v7 game model. So lanes 1, 2, and 3, we'll call it A, B, and C. So in this lane, you have the left back, you have center back, and you could put 2 center mids in here. And then you have the right back, right? So you have center mid or a striker and a, center back, midfielder, striker, and then you have 2 outside backs. So this would be a 7v7 game model. As the coach rolls the ball in from the side, everybody has to sprint to their exact lane. As only you could start off with 2, then add 3, then 4. Throw 3 defenders in there to start. Red team has to score by scoring on these 2 goals. You're automatically teaching them attacking organization, their shape, by assigning them the lanes that they have to go to. At some point, you can loosen this up and give a little more freedom. So maybe you have your center mid, be able to go out into the wing. But obviously, your outside backs are going to stay. They have to stay in this. Maybe your forwards allowed to drift out to either side as well. But those are constraints. That's teaching attacking organization using constraints. Now, you can also do, if red has the ball and they're in this corner lane, then the gray team can only fill this lane. In the center lane, they're not allowed to be in this lane. Now you're teaching defensive compactness using lanes, and that is a constraint. I already kind of went over this. I'm going to skip this slide for right now. Skip that. So I'm also going to get into this a little bit. I think I have the time. I'm going to get into Rondo, game model Rondo. So one of the things for me is that in training sessions, the training session itself can't possibly have, if I make a training session, hey, I want to work the ball faster through my back four, right? I don't know. That doesn't really apply to everybody. So I want to say be careful in making your training sessions, because sometimes you can't give a training session that what everybody really needs from that session. You're not going to give it to them. So if you have a training session that is more whole, then every player can pull from that session what they need. And the coach can come in there and jump in and give input when they need to, popping in and popping out. I almost think that these pre-planned training sessions where we're focusing on this prescriptive method of the team didn't do this last week, they're bad at this, so I'm going to come in and plan this training session to fix it. I'm starting to be of the viewpoint where that's not necessary, where just make sure it's game representative, make sure it's eventually the whole game, and you don't have to break things up and separate these things, because ultimately the coach can't coach every kid for exactly what they need, but the training environment can. That's what I just talked about. It's not going to just revolve. This process isn't going to revolve around diagnosing problems, especially at like a U8 level. Like, what problems are there to diagnose? The biggest thing is spread out, right? So here is what I developed, and this will probably bring it into a little bit more context, is increasing soccer intelligence, obviously game representative. I start off with small area game-based trainings, right? And this could be anything from 3v1, 4v2, whatever it is. It could be the goal, it could not be the goal, it could have, it really depends. It could have plus players, whatever it is. This could be at any age group, right? Then we go to medium games. These are with a little larger numbers. These they can be position specific, or they could be self-organizing. They could go to goal, they could not. It could have real goals, not. Then we go to large area possession, which is more game representative of the 11v11 model. It could be 11v11, it could be 9v9, but these are larger games. Within all three of these environments, notice this is all game-based training, small, medium, large. Depending on the workload for the day is what I pick. And obviously, if we have a game the next day, we're going to stay with all the small. Maybe I'll go small, and then I will go a little bit larger, but I'll go one touch and I'll do a 3-team tournament, and I'll have a whole bunch of plus players. So there really is no workload. I put my constraints into my constraint-based ideas are in all these all the time. All my positional play principles, if I want to teach, building out of the back and I want to have +1, +2, use your keeper, I can plug all my positional play principles already into these three areas. Supplemental exercises, I won't get into, but I can add those as well. Positional versus self-organized. This is a big thing for me, is people call possession chaos, right? And I think that the game in itself has a lot of moments of chaos where, hey, we're playing a 4-4-2, but that 4-4-2 can turn out into anything at certain moments of the game. Players have to be able to figure out and problem solve in the moment in real time. So I'll do possessions, game-based trainings, right, that are self-organized. I don't give the kids positions. They figure it out, and they have to figure out a way to keep the ball, figure out a way to win. Then we have strict positional games. We could talk about, for me, the 4v4 game model, 7v7, 9v9, it can all be taught through positional rondos. And I think that's important, but do not leave out the self-organized as well. So here's some simple stuff. If I'm going to, again, do like say this is U7, they're playing 3-on-3. So put a simple cone in the middle. This is the constraint. In order to score on this goal or this goal, you have to have a player on both sides of the field. That's it. One side will have 2, one side will have 1. If this guy comes in here, the goal doesn't count. It's that simple. That's teaching width in attack. That's a constraint. Now, if you split it even further, you might want to say there's 3 lanes, and you have to have a guy in each lane to score the goal. And this would probably be better if it was 4-on-4 to make sure all 3 lanes are occupied. And that's teaching width, right? You have a player in the middle, 1 out wide. So this goal actually wouldn't count if they scored here because they need a player in the middle. Again, 4v4 would probably be a little better with this type of width, this type of constraint. In this one, you could play, again, you got to have a player on both sides of the cone, but now this cone, if they're not, you can't have a player back here. If they score and there's a player back here, this goal doesn't count. It's teaching the players now to be compact, to have proper attacking support. So you don't have a player up here and a player all the way back. Nice and simple. That's simple constraints. And now what we did, you have to have players on both sides of the center cone, but now you have to have one player in this middle lane for the goal to count. So now in attack, you have attacking support. You can change the field. You can always play the ball back to the guy in the middle part who can then switch the field. You can't have all three players pressed up into that final third. You'd never have any attacking support. Players wouldn't be able to switch the ball from side to side. Simple constraints though. The players don't even have to know. They just have to follow the rules. So I'm giving you here, this is a 7v7 game model, right? And we'll start off here. This is center back, left back, right back, 2 center mids, and a striker. This is the far right-hand corner on the bottom. After, say, 4 passes, 3 passes, whatever you want, the ball can be transitioned to the other side as the left back and right back go, and the player in the middle goes, and the player in the center line turns around. This bottom right-hand one, this is strict teaching your game model through positional rondo play. Now, if you look on the left-hand bottom here, where I have my mouse going, we've taken out that transition, that center line. Now, as they draw the defenders in, they realize the space is on the other side. Can they get it to the striker? And this is without the center line. So this is still, it's building on that rondo type of exercise, positional rondo. In the top left-hand corner here, now we have our 7 versus 4, and you could see each player's position. The 4 players in the middle occupy that big, wider center line, as the left back and right back have to stay in the wide lanes. This is perfect for teaching, using constraints to teach attacking organization of your shape when you have the ball. And the one in the upper right-hand corner is a live game to goal. If blue intercepts the ball, or say if gray intercepts the ball, blue has to touch hands and they would switch the other direction and gray would try to score on goal. So those are nice, simple ways to use constraints and positional rondos to teach the 7v7 game model. Like I said, you could do the same exact exercises 4v4, you just modify them a little bit, and you could build this up to 9v9 as well. A couple other things for developing, and for me, this is all about developing soccer intelligence, right? So if you're going to teach 2v1s, these are some basic things, some basic movements, and you want to practice these in all different environments. When we think about teaching 1v1s, you look at the first one, opponent in front. How many times do you see everyone just practicing 1v1s go straight at the kid and try to beat them? Well, how about from the opponent behind them, the opponent on the side, the opponent at an angle, using a sideline? All these things are important. You don't want to just give one environment. This is where I was talking about variability. You always want to have variability in the way that you're developing players and developing soccer intelligence. Very, very important. So that's good. That's about 40 minutes right there. I am happy to start to take some questions now about any of it. I can kind of go on forever about any aspect that you guys would like to speak about.